Good morning, everybody. Happy Wednesday. My name is Naman, joined by my colleagues Japheth, Eden, and Jenny Ray. We are so excited to be with you all today to talk about how to set up a killer and stellar case competition. We're really excited to impart some of the hard-won knowledge that we've gained over the last 15 years to hopefully help you avoid some common pitfalls that we see as universities start to put case competition experiences together for their own students. As folks are joining us still in the Zoom room and on Instagram, YouTube, LinkedIn, just got a couple of important announcements that I'll share before we dive right in. The first is that if you are at a university and you're not currently working with us, we've got about 5 workshop dates left for this summer, and we prepare students for how to navigate case competitions, which is really how to think like a consultant, is what that is. We prepare students for case interviews. And if you're interested in learning more about what our live dynamic workshops are like, then just comment workshop in the chat and we'll get you more information on those. Secondly, we have a really exciting panel happening tomorrow where we're going to hear directly from 7 strategy consulting firms on the state of the industry. We hear a lot from our university partners and from candidates this misconception that the economy's in a recession and nobody's hiring. And that's just 100% false. And so we're going to hear directly from 7 firms tomorrow on their hiring plans for this year, on what is actually happening in the strategy consulting space and how students can differentiate themselves. And so if you're not already registered for that panel, there's a link in the chat for you to do that. We'd love to see you tomorrow as well. If you can't join us live tomorrow, register and you'll get a link to the recording. Last thing that I just want to mention is that one of the things that you can expect from us coming out of this call is that we're going to reach out to you to schedule some time with you to ask you how we can help you move forward in this case competition preparation and setup process at your campus. And so there's going to be opportunities for you to grab time on our calendar as we move throughout today, just for a free consultation. If you don't grab the time on the call today, we'll follow up with you so you can schedule with us directly. But we'd love to build on this call today and really help contextualize what we're talking about to your campus. So just be prepared for that as we move out of our live session today. We have a couple of opening questions for you just to get a sense of where you're at and what you're currently doing. So Japheth or Eden, are you able to pop the poll up? We've got 3 questions for you, going to be really helpful just as we move throughout our conversation today. The first is, which student population do you primarily support? Second is, are you already running case competitions on your campus? And third, do you send students to external case competitions? National Black, Deloitte, Ramba, et cetera, are your students already going to these regional or national competitions? I'm going to go ahead and leave the poll up for about 10 more seconds. So just go ahead and fill that out, and then we'll see where we're at as a group. Okay, wonderful. Y'all are on it today. So let's go ahead and share these results. Okay, looks like 6 out of 10 of us support MBA candidates on this call. Wonderful. About 4 out of 10 of us undergrad or specialty master students, and then a few of us supporting other graduate students. Just really helpful for us to get a sense of where your students are at. Looks like about 2/3 of us do not currently run a case competition on campus. My assumption is that you're here because you're thinking about maybe doing that. And so y'all can correct me if I'm wrong as we move throughout the day to day. And then do you send students to external case competitions? 50-50. Half of us do and half of us don't. And so for those of you who either run a case competition on your campus or send students to external case competitions, we will make time as we move throughout our session today to hear from you in terms of what you like about those experiences, what you don't like, why you do or you don't send students there, just so we can learn from each other and this is not just a one-way conversation. So really helpful context. Thanks for sharing that here as we kick off. Here's our plan for the next 45 minutes. We're going to go fast. We're going to cover a lot. So we're going to first just level set everybody around what a case competition is and why you should or shouldn't care. We'll then talk about who a case competition is right for. We've got people here who support a lot of different kinds of students. Third, we'll talk about if you are thinking about running an internal case competition, what time of year should you actually be putting that together? What's the most strategic time for you to run one? How do you set one up for success? And then we'll share with you a sample one-day structure that you can borrow or steal if you want. So that'll be at the end of our time together today. And we'll end with some Q&A and a conversation. And we're happy to stick around as long as you have questions. Before I dive in, Jenny Ray, I wanted to just give you the chance to share additional context or any other charge that you wanted to.
Awesome. Thanks, Naman. I'm Jenny Ray LaRue. I'm part of our case competition team, and I lead our coaching and teaching staff. And case competitions are just perfect for a lot of folks that are interested in exploring every kind of analytical career. Honestly, they're great for banking. They were really forged in a lot of the pitch competitions for banking or for investing. But the case competitions that we're going to talk about today run a very wide gamut. There are product management case competitions. There are hackathon case competitions. There are case competitions for VC. When I was an MBA at Columbia Business School, I participated in real estate case competitions, VC case competitions, and strategic case competitions. So we're going to cover kind of a lot of the different types, but one of the reasons that we love them is that students love them. And we've been really amazed and delighted as we've held these on campuses. We've been doing it for 10 years, holding case competitions on campuses as part of orientation processes, as part of an opt-in process for clubs. As we've been doing that, the main thing that is just the hallmark for us is that students come away and they say, I learned more in 6 hours than I've learned in an entire semester. And so that gamified real life case competition experience has been really valuable. One of the things that we've also seen in this really competitive environment in the last 12 months is students that come back to us and they say, after I did the case competition, every employer that I talked to asked about it. They wanted to know what I did, what we solved for, what challenges we had with our team. And so it's kind of putting a lot of the burden on the students to have an experience that employers used to take on themselves. There used to be a lot more of these types of group presentations and presentation cases that we saw inside interviews. They're just letting the students do that in advance and asking them how it went. So we're seeing a shift in that inside the market. And those are some of the reasons that we really care deeply about case competitions. So we're glad that you're here. We're excited to jump into the material.
Thanks so much, Jenny Ray. I was actually thinking this morning, I was trying to remember like how many case competitions have we run or facilitated over the last 10 years? And I literally lost count. And so we're really excited to share some of what we've learned over the last handful of years with you. Let's start with some basics for those of you who might not be familiar with the ins and outs of a case competition. I know Jenny Ray gave us a preview here, but what the heck is one? Teams of students are given a business case to solve within a limited time frame. It's a competitive event. It's a simulated problem that's based in a real world problem that an organization is facing. And it covers various aspects of business problem solving, like Jenny Ray mentioned: marketing, finance, strategy, operations, technology, a combination of all of the above. And so the misconception around case competitions is, oh, it's just a consulting thing. It's just a strategy thing. That's just a small part of what case competitions can actually cover. So how do students do this? Well, they form teams and they collaborate to analyze the business problem. They develop strategies after conducting analysis, and they present a set of recommendations to a panel of judges. So that's the format of a typical case competition. And how we evaluate teams when we're running case competitions is we really look at criteria like the feasibility of the solution that they're coming up with, the creativity of their problem solving, and the clarity of their presentation skills. And so when we think about putting an evaluative criteria together, we're really thinking about what are the skills that you need to really have honed for your first year post-graduation employment? And those are the skills that employers are really asking students about, to Jenny Ray's point, and those are the skills that they're really looking for on the resume. So that's how we're building our case competitions from the ground up. Why should you do a case competition? Well, if you haven't already figured it out, here's a few reasons. Number one, students develop problem-solving skills, not in a classroom setting. I think that's key. As internships become a little bit more difficult to find, as co-op opportunities become a little bit more difficult to find, these are ways that students can develop problem-solving skills outside of the classroom. They're able to apply theoretical knowledge to real-world scenarios. Case competitions are also great networking opportunities. We work with a lot of our partners to help them bring in their employer partners. And so as Management Consulted is putting together a case competition for a university, that university is reaching out to employers and saying, hey, we're running this competition. Why don't you come, employer, and help be a judge, help evaluate students? Why don't we set up a networking reception after the case competition so you can meet the students that you were just so impressed by? And so they're really unique ways for students to build connections with companies that aren't necessarily like cold networking oriented. As Jenny Ray already mentioned, this is incredibly resume worthy experience. So I won't go much more into that. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. And for the half of you that are sending your students to regional or national case competitions, there's a really key preparation type of mindset that is really built into students if they're going to run through like a workshop or a case competition on their own campus first. So really great preparation for the national block, the Deloitte, the other regional or national competitions that are happening, where these are less sanitized environments where students are rubbing shoulders with employers, they're rubbing shoulders with students from other schools, and they need to be on their game because they're not just representing you, they're representing the institution. And so if their first case competition experience is the one that Deloitte runs, for example, they could do well, but they might not. And so, like having a sanitized experience where there's some mentorship involved, where you've been involved in their preparation, is going to actually help them place when they go to the national competitions. And then last, a lot of the big competitions have prizes, right? Anything from cash prizes to interview invites to scholarships. And so that's a real reason why students engage in these case competitions and why you should be encouraging them to prepare for them, to run them on your own campus, and then to go to the larger ones that are being held nationwide. Overall, case competitions are a great proxy for the types of problems that you solve on the job. And Jenny Ray, it looked like you wanted to add something, so I'll give you a chance to do that.
I do. Yeah. Our team has an article on our website on case competition. So for those of you that aren't sending students because you don't know, or maybe it's honestly just not in your purview, like maybe the students go, but it's not your responsibility, but want to include that as an offering, Japheth is going to pop that link into the chat, our case competition profile, and that will kind of just walk through a number of the case competitions so you can see them. To Naman's point, one of the things that we put on there is how much money people can make, and you'll see like tens of thousands of dollars at some of these competitions. I had a meeting last year with a student who's in our black belt program. It's advanced case interview preparation. And it was in Washington, D.C. And he said he funded his whole second year MBA through case competitions. And I was like, I would need to know more. So that was kind of part of when we started to pull this resource together. If you have a case competition that is open to students from other schools, whether you're a club, but by the way, if anybody's here from clubs, case competitions are the #1 way you can fund your club activities. Host one, get a sponsor, have people pay to participate. It is an incredible funding mechanism for clubs on campus. But anyhow, when you're there, I think that will really help to have that. We will also email that to you afterwards. But I just wanted to note, like we actually are collecting the data. So if yours isn't included, we'd love to include it. If you need it, we'll share it with you.
Jenny, I'm glad you mentioned that because I was going to go right there. It's not just a fantastic funding mechanism for individual students, but for organizations and for universities. So I just had a call with a university in Canada a few weeks ago, strategizing around how they could host a regional case competition to make up for some of the budget shortfalls that they were seeing inside of their career services office. And so we're going to work together with them to run a case competition, not just to benefit students from a learning outcome perspective, but also to help the office from a budgetary perspective as well. And so lots of different use cases for case competitions that you all might not have even thought of yet. Who are they for? Short answer is they're for everybody. And so a lot of people, again, have the misconception that if you're a business or management student, hey, case competitions are for you. And yes, there's alignment with your coursework. There's alignment with career interests of those students for a lot of case competitions. There's also the networking aspect of some of these regional and national competitions that we've talked about, and the ability for those students to apply the knowledge they've gained in the classroom. That, I think, is how a lot of people think of case competitions in terms of who they apply to and who they're for. But they're really for everybody. They allow STEM students to integrate their technical knowledge with business acumen. They allow them to figure out, hey, is consulting, is marketing, is banking, is real estate, whatever the focus of the case competition is, like, is that industry right for me? And it allows them to add really relevant experience to their resume as well if they haven't necessarily had a business-focused experience yet. The same is true for liberal arts students. And I'd say one of the things that I found liberal arts students really gain a lot from the case competition experience is they get confirmation that their unique perspective really matters. And that a big part of the way that organizations think of diversity is not just through racial or ethnic or other types of diversity, but also diversity of background. And that when I, as an organization, I'm looking at hiring for a strategy or an analytics role, I think about liberal arts students as a part of my diversity pipeline because they have a unique perspective that like my engineering folks don't have, that my business and management folks don't have. There's a holistic perspective that comes from a liberal arts education that really can't be replicated. And specifically for roles in consulting, firms love students from liberal arts backgrounds. And so they get a chance to just understand that their perspective matters. They get a chance to determine if that industry is right for them, and they get a chance to add really relevant experience to their resume as well. January, can I ask you and just put you on the spot for a minute? Like, can you talk about your case competition experience at Columbia and just one of the things you got out of it or what you really found valuable? Because you already came from a consulting background. What was it about the case competitions that really drew you and helped you?
Yeah, a lot of the ones that I did, I wanted like Naman mentioned earlier, an unsanitized experience. I wanted to make sure that the work that I was doing in my business school experience was going to be really used to solve problems. And for me, a part of why I went to business school was to explore alternative career paths. And so it was an opportunity for me in one day to do that, where what would have otherwise taken a semester or a summer to really fully explore. It was like at the end of one day, I could be like, is VC for me? Yes or no? Is real estate for me? Yes or no? So I really loved the experiential aspect. And I do really want to encourage you as you're doing outreach to students. Like as we've worked with schools, sometimes they start too narrowly with the student populations that they're reaching out to. The teams are better and the students really benefit from that interdisciplinary experience. Plus, if you're representing a university, this can be supported by multiple, often career service or academic practices from a budgeting perspective. So you are leveraging both the power of insight and the teams and also a collaborative approach across your university. And there are benefits from both. So I loved being with people that had different realms of experience. I loved the experiential portion of it. I certainly got great feedback and insight as well. So there were a lot of really practical applications that were great for me.
I love it. Let's talk about when. So if you're like, okay, fine, I'm sold, or I was already sold coming in, and like I just wanted to know how to do it. Well, let's get a little bit more tactical in terms of when you should hold a case competition on your campus. And there's really only two options, fall or spring. So I think we're all aligned on those being the two options. But let's look at some of the pros and cons around fall versus spring case competitions.
Naman, there's always those special students that like just in the summer, they want to get together
Yeah,
for a case
that's true.
competition.
That's true. There are some special students among us. We could talk about those folks in the Q&A. But in terms of like when to set one up to where most students will engage, you've got a couple of options. And this really depends on the student population that you serve and support. We really love kind of early to mid-fall case competitions if the use case for your case competition is career exploration. So if you're looking to give students an experience that's going to help them determine which career path is right for them, then early on in the academic year makes a lot of sense. And specifically for our MBA cohorts, these are great camaraderie building experiences as well and cohort wide bonding experiences as well. And the earlier on in the program that can happen, up to and including orientation, the better. And so if that's the kind of use case, that's your goal for running a case competition, early fall can make a lot of sense. If you're looking more to prepare students for internship experience, like if you want to impart real world skills to them, if you want to prepare them for larger national competitions that mostly take place in the middle of spring, then maybe like a January or February timeframe is the better option for you. It's again a little bit further into the academic year. Students have gotten like the first semester classes out of the way. Right, the larger competitions are in sight now. They're only a few weeks away. And so what they learn inside of an on-campus case competition can be very seamlessly carried over into a regional or a national competition. And they're also in the spring starting to think about what their summer internship is going to look like. And so the skills that they pick up in the case competition will be fresh for them as they move into the summer. And so both timelines make sense. It depends on who your students are and really what you're looking for them to get out of the experience. And so we can talk a little bit more about this relative to your campus inside of the Q&A, and we'll reach out to set up a consultation with you, and we can have a deeper conversation around timeline when we set up those calls.
Hey, Naman, there's a great question in the
Yep.
chat. Greg from the University of Oregon, how does being on the quarter or the term system affect these timing considerations? You want to take that? You want me to take that?
Yeah, I'm happy to take it. It doesn't really, Greg, affect the timeline too much in terms of fall versus spring. I think you actually have a little bit more flexibility because typically our partners on the quarter system have a week or two break in between the quarters. And so that might be a good time for you to think about setting up a case competition or a learning experience when students aren't in class or in a transition period where maybe the coursework load is a little bit less. I think the quarter system actually gives you more flexibility than schools that aren't on the quarter system.
And you can just adjust for like what we mean by fall is kind of early term experience, right? Like students that are beginning their process, starting in new clubs. It's kind of taking advantage of that early enthusiasm and momentum of a program, and the fact that students aren't yet overweighted with experience or really honestly they're also not as career focused, so it gives them the opportunity to do that. And spring is more of a proxy of they're actually focused on careers. They're really hustling and thinking about it, and so you get usually larger pools of students in the fall experience. So for those of you for whom engagement and numbers are a core metric, that's something definitely to think about when you're thinking about planning it.
Okay, so you want to host one, what do you do? There's a lot going on this slide, and there's a lot of work that goes into running a case competition. So we're not going to lie to you and say it's easy, but we think it's worth it for your students and potentially for your offices as well. So let's just take this step by step and talk through what you do to set up a case competition that's actually going to be a value add for your students. So we've already talked about step one, which is just defining your objectives and your scope. So what's the ideal outcome? What's the metrics that you're going to judge success by for this case competition? Is it engagement? Is it skills building? Is it networking? What is it that matters to you and matters to your students? Is it a little bit of all of the above? That'll define or at least help define when you hold the case competition, what the scope of the problem is you want students to solve. Do you want to include employers or not, et cetera, et cetera. So the first is just aligning on what those goals should be. The second is determining who your target.
Iman, can I just mention, by the way, just some
Yep.
of I want to just overlay a couple quick learnings that we have
Yep.
here because these might be helpful. For the defining objectives and scope, I think like a lot of our schools would say that there's a couple key metrics that usually matter to them. Yours can be whatever they want. One is usually the number of students that are interested, right? That's always a good proxy for it. And so the number of students that are interested help with budgeting and focus. Number two is also the like level of partner or employer engagement. So how much funding and enthusiasm do they have from partners? And then the third is usually student experience based. It's harder to assess how much skill they gain, but it's really easy to assess whether they enjoyed it and felt like they built skills. So usually there will be some kind of survey process at the end. So those are the three things that if you feel like you've got that recipe in place, like that usually creates a lot of longevity in these programs. And then on the target audience, we do have a pretty strong point of view on this. You can be as inclusive as you want, but this is actually one of the only places where it is better to dial in because MBAs and undergrads can absolutely compete. Honestly, in the job market, they sometimes are, but there is a kind of experiential component to having students in a singular level. So especially masters, undergrads, or MBAs at that level kind of participating in singular competitions. So I just wanted to lay that on. Go ahead to the next one.
No, that's good context, and I'm in 100% alignment with you on that. Like once you've determined what those goals are, if you've got like those three ingredients to like have a case competition on campus that's going to be successful, the next step is to start to think about, okay, what's the type of case, what's the type of business problem that's going to actually give my students the experience I've just identified as being the most important to them. And so the first thing you have to think about is how are you going to source the business problem? Are you going to write a case? That's 100% an option for you. Are you going to have management consulted write a case? Are you going to partner with an employer who will give you a case? Right. So understanding where you're going to actually source the material that's going to make up the bulk of the competition is step two. And a couple of ways that we think about how we're going to write a case or what business problem we're going to focus on is really just determining, okay, the level that your students are at and the types of roles that they're targeting, what type of business problem would be relevant for them, would be challenging for them, and would allow them to apply some of the skills that they've honed during your program inside of this experiential setting. And so if we have partners that come to us and say, hey, you know what, like our specialty master students, they like over index in going into technology. Great. So the case that we'll bring to that case competition is a technology case that focuses on Netflix, right? We have other partners and programs that come to us and say, hey, like our students are really interested in strategy or they're really interested in marketing. And that's the type of branding that we want them to have. Those are the types of employers they're going to be talking to. And so then that's what we'll utilize in terms of just insight to build a case that's really relevant for the students. And that's going to help you with the marketing as well, because if that's where students want to go, if that's the type of experience they want to build, they're more likely to come and take part in the competition. And then the third thing we think about.
Can I just mention one thing on that too? Almost nobody does their own, just as an FYI. Like you guys you can do it, but that is a huge hurdle and it's way harder than it feels or looks. It's not hard to come up with a concept, but to provide the guidelines and the scoring and the like the guidance kind of all around it that wraps around everything else we're about to talk about becomes really really challenging and kind of knowing what size of problem to do. So just so that you can do it, but almost no one does.
Yeah. And a big part of the reason is there's a lot of background information and data that's required for solving the case. And so one of the things that we'll do is we'll put together data sets for our case competitions that students can go play with and interact with during the competition. Employers will do the same thing. And so just be thinking about not just the business problem from a conceptual point of view, but it has to have enough meat on the bone for students to really dig into over, an extended period of time. Third, logistics and scheduling. So we've already talked about timing. The one thing I just want to mention here is that you've got two different models for case competitions. You've got a one-day competition or a multi-day competition. And our bias is strongly towards a one-day experience.
Internally, right, Naman?
Internally.
Mm-hmm.
Is towards a one-day experience. We have partners who on their own have tried multi-day or multi-week case competition experiences and just found a lot of attrition and drop-off in engagement over the days and the weeks. And that cuts against all of the learning outcomes and all of the goals that they want students to achieve by taking part in that experience. So one of the things that we've done at Management Consulted is we condensed all the best parts of a case competition into one day. So students have a little bit of prep that they do beforehand, but they show up on the day, they're ready to go. It's a lot of work on one day, but then at the end you're done. And you've had this catalytic experience that's given you insight, that's given you skills, that's given you stories that you can tell in your interview in a really condensed time frame. And so as we move forward in our conversation today, what we're going to really focus on is talking about one-day case competitions. I think if you're thinking about putting a case competition together on your own, logistically speaking, that's just going to be the option you're going to want to go with as well. And so we're really going to hone in on that format moving forward. And I'll show you a sample schedule for a one-day competition at the end of our time together. You also want to think about in-person or virtual. We run competitions in both settings. I think that there are pros and cons to both. You typically see like a larger N with a virtual case competition because there's no space constraints. You see typically higher engagement, better mentorship outcomes, like a more realistic presentation type of experience in person. And so one of the things that we help our partners think through is, hey, in person or virtual, what's going to work better for our students? About 7 out of 10 of our partners end up choosing in person over virtual. And we found that just to be a way to garner better engagement from students. They seem to have a better time. They seem to build better camaraderie in person versus virtual. And so just, again, something to think about as you're putting a case competition together. Last thing I'll mention here just around logistics is how large are your teams going to be? Our recommendation is that you have teams of 4 to 6 students and that you really think about, are you going to allow students to apply for the experience solo? And then are you going to set up the teams on the back end? Or are you going to force students to apply as teams? And are you going to put the onus on them to put the team together that they want to work with? Again, there are pros and cons to both. Um, I think the easier way is just to have students apply solo, and then you kind of randomly parse them out into teams. That way, there's less of a barrier to entry as they're thinking about engaging in the competition. Again, we can talk about specifics of your campus, what would matter more to your students here in the Q&A. But it's something to think about ahead of time instead of just setting up a registration process and not actually thinking through how the teams are going to operate together.
Again, can I just say that on the logistics, Naman, we found that nationally, a lot of the team sizes are around 4, but we can certainly accommodate for larger team sizes. And we'll talk about some of the coaching pieces that we would often support people with. So larger teams are functionally no problem and sometimes have additional benefits. But if one of your goals is we want our students to win nationally, then having those 4-person teams can be really important. But also, we have definitely found that schools that allow teams to register together increase their registrations. And so just to double down on that message, there always should be a like apply alone and we'll put a team together option, but usually it is under 20% of the teams that submit. Almost everybody prefers to know who they're going to be working with in advance. So again, that's been a good learning for us to understand. The exception to that is like MBA cohorts, first week, especially master's cohorts, first month, like, sorry, like you get the luck of the draw, and you're working with it. But anybody who uses that kind of pod or cohort model, that's a place where you could force it. Otherwise, it's generally better to let people subscribe themselves.
And one of the ways you can drive that is through leveraging your clubs on campus, to get the word out about the case competition, get the word out about how you want folks to register solo or in a team. We found that students are very incentive driven, as I'm sure you already know. So the benefits that are going to come from the case competition are a big part of getting students in the door, whether it's a prize that you're going to offer as a program, whether it's like networking opportunities that are gated, like perhaps you don't get access to a reception, you don't get access to an info session unless you come to the case competition first and take part, or if the incentive is really skill development that you can add to your resume. Whatever the incentive is, we found that keying the messaging in on that really, really powerful. And then the third hurdle that we found to students taking part is that they don't feel prepared. And so one of the things that we've done is we put a prep plan and a prep roadmap together to actually set students up for success on the actual case competition day. And I'll talk to you on the next slide about what our prep includes. And then you can decide if you want to put your own prep together. You can take some of the concepts that we've highlighted there, or you can work with us to prepare your students for case competitions.
And just to add in there, you do have another channel, which are professors.
Yeah.
The reason that we really highlight clubs here is that FOMO is more powerful than extra credit. And so professors can offer a boost. They can certainly help you tell people that they're there. But when it's student to student and all of the peers are doing it and everyone's blocking out a Friday and it's also a semi-social experience, the clubs are really the most powerful way that you're going to drive recruitment here. So you can include the professors, but please don't make it the core of your strategy.
And the last thing that we think about is just how are we going to make this a really valuable learning experience for students? And so how are we going to get an expert panel of judges together that understands what the business problem is, understands what the skills are that the case competition is looking to build in students, and actually knows how to deliver feedback in a way that students can digest. I run across a lot of subject matter experts every day in the course of my role, but they are terrible communicators. They don't know how to share feedback in a way that students are able to digest. So a part of being on a panel and a part of being a judge is not, do you know what you're talking about from a subject matter expertise perspective, but are you able to deliver that expertise in a way that's actually going to be valuable for students? That's really the secret sauce when it comes to evaluating judges and determining who gets put on your panel and who doesn't. And setting that expectation with employers, if they're going to be a part of the panel, is incredibly important, because often they'll send folks who are great communicators, but not like deep in the weeds on the work, or vice versa. And students will miss something in the feedback because of who the employer sends to be their representative. And so just set that expectation ahead of time with them. And that's one of the things that we work on with our partners that we run case competitions with. Often a majority of the panels that are like in our case competitions are made up of our team. because our team has the business acumen, the subject matter expertise, and the facilitation and instructing experience to give students all of the feedback in a way that they're able to digest. Jenny Ray, anything else you want to add to the importance of the judges?
No, just like we really don't have a bias of whether we bring a case or an employer does. A lot of employer cases are really valuable. And a lot of the employer partnerships does involve having them judge. But as Naman mentioned, this is not their day job. They don't think about judging case competitions. And so they'll show up, and one functional member of a marketing team will have a completely different perspective than somebody in an operations team, and they won't have any sense of how it goes. So we usually run a judging training over lunch in the one day competition if you do bring in external partners. Also, if you leverage people internally, if you want to use your staff at career services or other professors, just again, so everybody is kind of on the same page. But usually if we don't do that for you, we would recommend that you do it yourself, because a judge training is a really important part of the student experience. If they feel like they're judged fairly at the end, it makes the whole thing feel super worth it. And if they don't feel like it's fair, it really puts a taint on the whole experience. So just wanted to layer that on as well.
I think somebody in the chat, Jenny Ray, and I don't have full visibility into this, asked about like how do you prepare students for case competitions?
Oh,
And,
yeah.
and I'm glad that she asked, because here it is right here. Here are the skills that students need a foundational understanding of before a case competition. And this is a little bit high level in general, because some of the more technical skills or the specific business acumen that students might need to know is going to be dependent on the type of case competition that you're going to run. But these skills are 100% transferable and 100% applicable for no matter what case competition type or style they're going to pursue. So the first thing that students need to understand is how to make a PowerPoint slide. And I don't mean like how you open up PowerPoint and you like put text or graphics on a slide. I mean, how do you communicate a message through a slide, and how do you pair on-slide content with off-slide presentation to tell a seamless narrative? And that narrative needs to be constructed in a way that can gain the buy-in and motivate action from the panel of judges that you're presenting to. So making a PowerPoint slide is not about aligning objects. It's not about throwing a picture on a slide. It's about how do you tell a story through slides. Second, how do you make a research plan? The biggest hurdle that we see students face inside of case competitions is time management. The number like one skill that students learn coming out of case competitions is how to get to an answer that makes sense quickly. And understanding that getting to an answer is better than getting to the best answer. In the real world, and I think everybody in this call can relate to this, you never have enough time to do all the work that you want to do, and you never have enough data to inform the decisions that you're making. We all live in a data and time constrained world. And so case competitions impart, right, this experience to students where, hey, I'm never going to have the time that I want. I'm never going to have the data that I want. I'm going to have a boss, a board, a client who's pushing me to get to an answer faster and faster and faster. So if you do not have a research plan set up ahead of time, if you are not hypothesis driven in your problem solving approach, you will fail. And you'll get to an answer at the end that really, like, the crux of that answer is going to be, hey, you know what? I needed more time. I needed more data. And if you come to a panel of judges with that kind of answer, if you come to a CEO or a board with that kind of answer, well, you're fired as a like advisor, or you're fired or reassigned as an internal asset. And so making a research plan is not just about knowing how to do research. It's about knowing how to be hypothesis driven. It's about knowing how to solve problems from the top down. And if you don't have that as a part of your curriculum, if that's not being taught in the classroom, then that's something that I strongly recommend that you bring into the prep process for your students who are going into case competitions. 3 and 4 really are just a level deeper into the type of research and analysis that students are going to do. They're going to do qualitative research and analysis, and they're going to do quantitative research and analysis. So how do you present qualitative insights on a slide, and how do you present quantitative insights on a slide? And this training is really focused on data visualization. A lot of students tend to vomit everything that they've learned through the course of their research and analysis onto a slide. And they're like, look at all the work that I did. Look at all the interesting information that I found. And there's no clarity and there's no prioritization to what they're sharing. And so they need to have a framework in mind to understand, what do I share, what's important for my audience to know, and what's the order in which I share it. And then finally, presentation skills. How do I not just have great slides that I read off verbatim. Right? There's no executive presence in that. There's no realistic experience in that. And so the final piece of any good case competition training talks about how to take what's on a slide and add color, perspective, and life to it so that there's value that you're bringing beyond what's on the slide. And so that your audience is engaged not just by reading the slide, but by listening to what you have to say as well. And all of these skills, are proxy for life on the job. And they're really the core skills that pre-graduate or postgraduate students will be over-indexing on or have their time over-indexed on in their first year of employment post-graduation. Jenny Ray, I'm going to take a breath, so I'll let you take over if you have anything to add to
Yeah.
this.
You guys, Naman is delightfully intense. And as you can see here, the only reason that Naman would want to do a case competition is to win the case competition. And we love that. I just wanted to add on to that all of these things are required for students on the job ultimately. But the case competition is one way in general that you can give these experiences to them. And so if you are training a competitive set of teams that you want to send to national competitions, if you want them to reflect really well on your school, then these are the support levels that you're going to want to give them. But it is passable. And some schools are just like, this is what the case competition is for, to just have them jump in blind. So our general recommendation is that they do a pre-work course. We provide one if you use us. The pre-work course helps you work through digital materials that show you a best practice way to do all of these. There are 10 ideas around best practices in the world, so it kind of just centers everybody into this case competition, what's expected. But I just want to let you know that, like, if your students are not as focused on winning case competitions and more focused on the experience of case competitions, just having them show up at 10 a.m. on a Saturday and doing a case competition will also give them exposure and experience to this. So you're going to have different student bodies. I just wanted to acknowledge that.
That's fair. And the good news is you'll build these skills even without pre-work. And the same skills that will help you win a case competition will help you on the job.
Yeah.
And
losing a case competition is maybe one of the best instructors of what you do need to do the next time. We would love to see a bunch of people winning at the margins, right? Making like really material insight differences. And we always hate to see that students just like don't finish their presentation in time, or really simple things that are solvable with a little bit of pre-work, but it is an option that you have as you're setting these up for yourself.
Here's what a standard structure for a one-day case competition can look like. So you've got pre-work that's happening before the day. Again, if you want to give your students that pre-work, a lot of case competitions we run, we make the pre-work optional. And it's obvious in the case competition which teams did the pre-work and which didn't. And so I think that also informs students as to the importance of some of the skills that you're trying to have them build as a part of the experience. In the first couple of hours, best practice is to introduce the case. It's to share ground rules and best practices, and it's to push each team to prepare a hypothesis. I've already talked about the importance of hypothesis-driven problem solving. And one of our goals as we're mentoring teams through case competitions is that in the first 30 minutes, they've identified the answer to the problem, right? Or an answer to the problem. And the rest of their time is spent conducting research and analysis to support the hypothesis that they've come up with. And if there is no support for the hypothesis they've come up with, then it's much easier for them to go back and adjust the answer if they're starting from a place of potential answer first, if they're starting from a hypothesis first. And so one of the things that we push students to do early is get a sense of what you think as a team the answer is. Hours 3 to 5 are there to help you prove or disprove your hypothesis. And it's where you start to put your story together, and it's where you start to put your slides together. If you run a case competition with Management Consulted, one of the things that we do in hours 3 to 5 is we have a mentorship session with each team. And we come and we poke holes in their story. We ask them questions that the judges will ask them. We have them bounce ideas off of us. We push them to go in one direction and not in another, just based on what we know about the business model of the company or what we know about just the business at large. And so that mentorship is a key part of internal case competitions. Again, helps students stay engaged. It helps them understand that, hey, winning is important, but it's not the only thing. I'm here to learn. And it gives them a chance to pick the brain of folks who are more experienced than them as well. And then we really end the last hour with presentations. We take a lot of time on presentations because one of the core skills that students are going to build is like the verbal presentation of a recommendation. And so each team is like at the front of an auditorium. The panel of judges is there. Ideally, every other team, or at least a subset of the other teams, are there in the audience as well. So you're presenting to your peers as well. You've got like a strict time limit on how long you have to present. Again, to Jenny Ray's point, that's one of the key learning outcomes coming out of the case competition is that if you have 5 minutes to present, you better get the story out in 5 minutes because you're not going to have a CEO, a board, a client give you more time than they promised you. So you have a time limit on the final presentation. You walk through your story, you answer the questions that the judges have for you, and then at the end, there's some kind of feedback mechanism that's in place for judges to share both positive and constructive criticism with each team. And so y'all can feel free to screenshot this, take a picture of it. One of the things that we do in our consultation calls is that we walk through the schedule and we help you adjust it for who your students are, what your goals are, and just some of the time or the space constraints that you may be working within. But this is our starting point for how we put case competitions together for our partners.
I'll add just one thing here or really dial in on it. The mentorship piece here is optional, but like I would say you really should include it. It's incredibly valuable. You can use second year students or people who have gone through case competitions as coaches. It's helpful if they all have a similar background so that you're giving fair representative insight to all of the teams. And if one team is saying do this on a slide and another coach is saying do that on a slide, then you're going to end up with really again that fairness. But the mentorship for a lot of people, they feel like is the most valuable learning in this process. And it really does help accelerate a better outcome for every team because some teams really may not finish without that mentorship component. So I just wanted to call that out because a lot of organizations work without it. I think when you see that, it's often because the teams are already experienced. So just so that you know.
I wanted to save the last 10 minutes of our time together for Q&A, discussion, conversation. And so I think the best way to do this would just be if you have questions around how to run a case competition on your campus or about anything that we've talked about today, just go ahead and raise your virtual Zoom hand. And we'd love to have you unmute and ask the question verbally. And if you're not in a place where you're able to ask a question verbally, then you can utilize the chat as a backup. But we'll take the next handful of minutes to answer your questions before we wrap up for the day. Corey, great question. And Jenny Ray, I'll throw this one to you first. Any thoughts on methods or process for peer feedback in groups? Peer feedback is not always constructive, which I think is the understatement of the day.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that we usually recommend in the pre-work and also like if we're running the case competition, actually, like Naman didn't really share exactly what we do. So let me just mention that because I think there's some insights in here. The first thing that we do is that we provide pre-work. It's digital. It's usually delivered 2 to 4 weeks in advance of the case competition. And as you mentioned earlier, it's optional. And it covers a lot of the hey, this is what a slide should look like. This is how long it should be. This is how you develop a hypothesis. Part of why we do that is that unhelpful peer feedback for people that come from different backgrounds, who had different internships, who have a different point of view. While diversity is often incredibly valuable in large practice, in this short form accelerated practice, it can be confusing and it can cause a lot of strife on teams. So part of why we do that is to create the central source of truth. So everybody's like, well, this is how it should be. And there's not that kind of constant jockeying for, I think it should go this way instead. That creates a lot of peace on the teams and it helps them focus on a lot of the acceleration. Peer feedback in the groups, we don't recommend until afterwards. So we often will have a debriefing process. But while they're going through the process, we as coaches, when we're in the coaching process, when we're helping employers coach or when we're coaching students to coach, we generally recommend that we focus on our sessions on exactly what's going to happen. So usually, for example, I would walk in the room and I would say, great, what's your hypothesis? And if they say it in one sentence, then I know that they're fine. And if they don't, then we spend the next 15 minutes getting to, okay, awesome, but what is your hypothesis? No, we have to decide on a hypothesis. So we don't, peer feedback is challenging because often people focus rather on function, on merit. So they're like, is that a good idea? Is it a good hypothesis? Is it a clear hypothesis? And we as coaches, because we're experienced and have done this across the board for many different teams in many different contexts, know, no, the right question here is only one question, which is, do you have one? If you have one, that's all we needed to know. Awesome. Then the second question, when we go back again or in that same meeting, is what is your storyline? And the question isn't, is it a good storyline? The question is, do you have a storyline? So again, really like keeping your coaches focused on asking the right questions is a part of, I think, the magic of helping students really unlock that value over the course of the day. So in our mind, peer feedback midday, early in the process is super unhelpful. At the end of the process, peer feedback can be insightful. But in general, if you extrapolate the feedback from the groups that are doing it and you leave feedback to self-reflection, it's often as or more powerful and more actionable as well.
I just want to add one thing to that. I think Jenny Ray mentioned something that's a key learning outcome for a lot of students. There's almost no problem in the world that only has one answer or one right answer. And so I think that the goal is for students to understand there are probably 8 right answers that would like meet the criteria of this case. My job is not to figure out in this 6 hours what the best one is. My job is to identify one of them and put the best story together that would get the panel of judges to like buy into what I'm giving them. And that is a different skill and that is a different mindset than identifying the best answer to every problem. And that is one of the key learning outcomes that students have coming out of a case competition. And it's one of the things that really sets them up to be top performers on the job, because that's your goal inside of most professional settings. Get to an acceptable answer fast, not necessarily get to the best answer slow.
Love it. Another thing that I'm going to say, and then Donna, I'm going to come to your question, is that we didn't weigh in earlier on the virtual versus in-person case competitions. We generally find that you have higher subscription rates for in-person, just so that you know. There is something really powerful about the social experience. Most of the time, the school or an employer sponsor will provide lunch. There's something also that is accelerated about the learnings when students don't have the friction of having to like pass off information digitally or not being able to kind of like look over someone's shoulder. So there is, I think, an optimal solution for that, which is doing it on campus. And we often find that a lot of those things are better. It is 100% possible to do it virtually. We love doing it virtually. We're happy to do it virtually, and it's more affordable to do it virtually. We are going to run a virtual case competition co-sponsored with Mark Cosentino from Case in Point in the spring of 2025 to demonstrate how a lot of these learnings can happen. And Mark is a good friend and a longtime proponent of ours. We have him as well. So we're going to have a lot of fun releasing that. If some of you are not ready maybe to build this internally, but would like for your students to go to one, we will keep you informed once registration opens about that. And you'll see how the virtual is there. But on the feedback theme, I think that the in-person is powerful. And then Donna, I just wanted to tie into that. In your experience, how many teams do you find works well, especially for first-time schools? I think the target usually is somewhere around 25 to 50 students. So somewhere in the like 6 to 12 team range is a great target for first-time schools. That helps ensure the day runs really well. Usually those students are extra bought in, so it helps to kind of build a basis for that. But the threshold does not have to be high from a student interest perspective. And by the way, if you're worried about student interest, I just want to say don't be. Like you might not have assessed it yet, but we have not found one school where the students are uninterested in this. And I'm talking like community college up to Harvard, right? So this is a type of learning experience that students are really excited about, especially once they know the parameters are clear, the time involvement is limited, and they're going to be supported along the way. So first time schools can do larger ones. Like we can scale it. And actually we have a couple of schools that we work with that do knockout rounds. So they do a pre-round before the day's round. And that gives every student the opportunity to participate. And then some students more of a focused option. So if you want to discuss it with us, whether you decide to work with us to help us do it or not, we're just really passionate about this type of learning experience for students. So we can have that conversation as well. Oh, yes. Susanna asked the question. Naman, you want to go back to the last slide on the mentorship kind of parts? Yeah. So for MC, I'll take this one, Naman. You can layer in as well. For MC, we usually bring a couple of different coaches depending on the size of the group. Sometimes one coach can handle it if it's just a few teams, but usually we'll split up our coaches and they'll be co-meeting with each of the teams. And they're asking those guidance questions that I was talking about before. And they're asking them with the insight to kind of say, no, you're not there yet, or yes, you are, right? So it's not just the asking of the questions, it's providing the clarity and the insight. And our main goal during the day is that the students feel empowered to make decisions that they feel like they might get paralyzed in the process of otherwise. So if you work with MC, that's included. We put the mentorship teams underneath our purview. We bring staff on campus, or we do it virtually, where the staff will meet with each one of your teams. And so each one of your teams will have the opportunity to meet once or twice, depending on the way that we structure the session, with somebody who has expertise in case competitions. And that, again, if they're going back and forth between they have this great idea and half the team wants to do this idea, that helps just to be like, great, we're going to pick one. What are we going to pick? And then we don't tell them which one to pick because we don't care. Honestly, we've heard a lot of the cases multiple times, and it's never the same idea that wins. It's always the best proof of the idea that wins. And so we don't care about the best idea. We're never trying to guide them to that. We're really helping them through the process. And so we have seen it done as well effectively with somebody who is done very experienced in case competitions, where they have, again, that kind of single source of truth. The only thing you can't do is just have like somebody good in business. You can't have an employer coach, because those employer coaches or somebody good in business that doesn't have that single source of truth really creates complexity. So yeah, usually our meetings with students are 15 to 30 minutes out of this time. We're working with them. So we're like touching slides and rewriting taglines. It's not a meeting. They don't present to us. It's really a co-working time. And that mentorship is really powerful as well.
Amazing. We're right at time for our session today. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap up our call today. Thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate you spending an hour of your day learning about how to set up a case competition. If you've got further questions, I'm going to pop our email address in the chat. This goes to our entire team, so you feel free to write us with questions. I'm going to ask Eden to pop a link to our calendar in the chat as well. And if you're not able to jump into like our calendar immediately after this call, we'll follow up with you directly and give you a chance to set up the consultation that we mentioned today. We're really looking forward to bringing case competitions to a lot more campuses around the country here over the next year. So thanks again, and enjoy the rest of your Wednesday.
And as Naman mentioned, we'll talk to you about how to do it. But the one thing that we have alluded to, we will also talk to you about how to fund it. So please, if you're thinking it could be of interest, we'll also talk to you about how not to run it yourselves. A lot of career service offices oversee it, but then use internal partners to not take on another responsibility. So anyhow, there are lots of hurdles to running case competitions. We've seen everybody get over different ones. We're happy to help you with that as well. Thanks everyone for joining. Appreciate you.